Did you know that game theory isn't just a nerdy YouTube show? It's also a nerdy economics concept.
Yes! Yes, I did, and this is such a gift because I am an economics professor who has had a grudge against MatPat for 12 years. Now, you're thinking, how is that possible? He has only been doing this show for 13 years. But yes, since the beginning of this, I have had a grudge against MatPat, and when he announced his retirement, I thought maybe it's time for me to finally come clean, to release all these emotions I've been bottling up for the last 12 years. But then I thought, no, let MatPat have his moment. Let him enjoy the final days of his retirement. But then he had to go and make this as his final video. He had to come and talk about economics. So I think it's finally time for me to talk about why MatPat and I have some beef together. But I'm going to also go through this video and start looking at the economics that he talks about. How well does MatPat do at explaining game theory? Does he understand the economics? And how does all of this relate to why I've not wanted to watch game theory for the past 12 years?
At this point, we've created enough confusion online that apparently we've merited our own disambiguation tag on Wikipedia for game theory searches.
This is called foreshadowing. I'm not going to talk about this right now, but holy cow, he's just starting off by addressing our beef.
Steph and I knew from the very beginning that it was likely that the final episode of Game Theory was going to be about game theory. Why? Well, because game theory, it's everywhere.
So I'm really interested to see where he goes with this, because I say economics is everywhere, and game theory is economics, but squares are rectangles, and I might say rectangles are everywhere, and maybe that's true if I live in Minecraft, but to say that squares are everywhere, well, then you're gonna miss out on rectangles that aren't squares. Now, maybe you say, well, all rectangles are made out of squares, and therefore, squares are everywhere. But I'm just saying that I'm a little skeptical on this, because I can think of situations where game theory is not there. And so I'm interested to see where he thinks game theory is everywhere and why.
Well, to understand that, you have to go back to the original game theorist, not me, this guy. This guy right here, he is mathematician John von Neumann, and he was everywhere.
Okay, not to be pedantic here, but I just think this little bit is hilarious because there's this detail on the poster where he says, what is game theory? And he has a pronunciation guide for game theory, something we all know how to pronounce, but you know, they're just trying to play a little bit here. But then he butchers the name of the mathematician. The mathematician is John van Neumann, not Newman. In fact, you can go to the Wikipedia page and it shows you how to pronounce his name, Neumann. So I think just the contrast right there is super ironic.
Perhaps his biggest claim to fame was game theory. The idea that in any situation where there are two or more people, or players in this case, you can model out a game that'll help you find the best outcome.
Okay, so this is one of those things where I feel like he understands what game theory is, but that little definition right there missed out on some key things. Now, he's mentioned some of these things, so maybe if you like take all the pieces together, it's going to fit. But game theory is not just modeling what happens when there are two people interacting. It's important to understand that it's two people with a strategic interaction. So what is a strategic interaction? I think the best way to understand this is to contrast it with something that is non-strategic. And we can do that with a classic game, not like in economics, but I mean like a real classic game, Tetris. When I'm playing Tetris, I have strategies that I implement while I play. The blocks pop up and then I put them down. I understand that certain blocks shouldn't go in certain places, otherwise it's going to create problems down the line. But when I'm using that strategy, it's not affecting how anybody else plays. It's not affecting anyone else because I'm not playing against anyone. It's a single player game in Tetris, and it's not affecting how the computer responds to my choices. There's just an algorithm, some random divvying up of blocks that come out and say, here's your next block, where you're going to place it. I put it in the place where I strategically think is the best place to put it, thinking forward. And then I just keep playing without anybody responding, without anybody trying to figure out what I'm doing. And Tetris might be a contrived example, but this happens all the time when I am thinking about how much candy I want to buy or which book I want to read next. I'm not always thinking strategically. I'm thinking just in a utility maximization framework where I say, how much satisfaction am I going to get from this choice, and what's the opportunity cost? And then I weigh those out and I do it until, marginal cost equals marginal benefit. Those are the kind of things I talk about on this channel. But I don't have to make a choice that then somebody else is responding to with their choices, and then we have to then take into account each other's choices. Now, certainly, sometimes those choices do evolve into strategic interactions. Like if I'm trying to choose a book and I'm trying to think about a book that somebody else might read and wanting to read the same book and not being able to communicate with them to figure it out. Yeah, sure. If I'm choosing my book based on what other people are reading, that now becomes a strategic interaction. There's game theory involved. But there are a lot of choices I make where I don't care about the choices that other people make and how that affects my payoffs. And so that is not game theory. And that's why I'm worried about saying game theory is everywhere, because there are a lot of times where the choices I make do not depend on the choices that others make.
Rock is the first hand because, statistically, most people choose their first move to be scissors, or maybe a picked paper because the last 3 moves have been rock and they're obviously going to be thrown rock again. Well, congratulations, that is game theory in action.
Totally right there, right? Like he's thinking of choices where you have to consider the choices others are making. That is game theory. He understands it. Like I said, I think he understands the core concepts, but I worry that viewers are going to miss out on some of those nuances and think that everything is game theory.
Probably the most famous example of a game theory scenario is the prisoner's dilemma, where 2 accomplices have just committed a crime and they're both given the chance to narc on the other one.
Totally right. Prisoner's dilemma is the go-to example for understanding game theory. In fact, I recently did a video on the prisoner's dilemma. In fact, I actually, without even planning this, released that video the same week that MatPat announced his retirement, and I was really worried that because it had game theory in the title, people were going to think that it was related to MatPat. Nope, I came up with that video before that retirement was announced, and now I am going to be doing the video on The Grudge. Right here I am, getting to our beef that we have with each other.
Outcomes here in a nice, neat, mathy looking square. And while technically the best outcome for both of them would be to trust each other and not confess, they're criminals, and they don't know each other that well. And because they don't trust each other, by the math, both of them narc on each other.
Okay, he is really close on this, but there's a key thing that he has made a mistake on, and it's really important to even the lessons that he's going to get to, right? So he says, technically, the best outcome for both of them is for them both to deny, right? To stay quiet, to cooperate is another way that we say it. And that is the best outcome jointly. When we look at how do we minimize total time in prison, yeah, we want them both to deny. But then he says they don't trust each other, so they both confess. But trust has nothing to do with this. In fact, trust is, like, if there was trust there, these prisoners would enjoy it. The same thing would happen, right? Even if there's trust, this would happen. Why? Because when these prisoners are looking at what to do, they consider what the other person's doing. This is the game theory part. And you say, hey, what happens when my accomplice decides to confess? Well, if he confesses and I don't confess, I'm going to get a long sentence. But if I confess too, I'll get a medium sentence. It's better for me to confess if I know that he's going to confess. Okay? Well, what if I trust him? What if I think he's going to do the best thing for both of us? And he cooperates with me, he denies the crime. Well, I could also deny the crime and I could get a short sentence. But you know what? If I confess while trusting that he's going to deny, I get out for free. I get no prison time at all. So no matter what my opponent does, the best thing for me to do is to confess. That is not about trust. That is about the incentives that have been set up. And it's designed to give you an incentive to confess no matter what your accomplice does. If I was by myself, I should just deny all the time. But once you put in another person interacting with you and doing things where their choices affect what your outcome is, now we get to the game theory and I say I should confess no matter what. And so this is why it's such a classic game, because once you introduce another player, it changes your choice. But it's not about trust. It's about the incentives that are set up. And that's a key part of this game.
Over in England, they turned the whole thing into a game show where they say the word balls an uncomfortable amount of times.
Welcome to Golden Balls. Golden Balls. Balls of riches, 12 balls. My balls are all golden.
Okay, that's like a really awkward compilation of them saying balls all the time in this show. But what you really should do is go find one of these videos where it shows this final round and they're going through the prisoner's dilemma, because it is fascinating to see people play this and to see what happens in real life. Because a lot of times in real life, as I've talked about in other videos, people go against the prisoner's dilemma for the reasons that MatPat wants to bring up in just a few seconds. But in these videos, they do not always follow that. And it's really interesting to see the psychoses behind these people.
Across the thousands of rounds of testing, nice strategies that were fair, but also firm, ultimately won out the most.
So these are great suggestions on how to take some life lessons away from game theory, but there's a really important point in here, and I think it's worth highlighting to make sure you understand how to apply this, because there really is an application from this point that he left behind. Because you do want to trust people, you do want to push back, right? You want to forgive, you want to do those things. But there are situations where that won't make a difference, right? Actually, Golden Balls is an example of this, because you're only interacting with these people once, and so it's easy for you to just cut and run. That's what the whole prisoner's dilemma is about, is you're only interacting with this person once, and so it leads to some perverse behavior. The key to the trust game is that it was run 500 rounds. These people, or little simulations, were running against each other over and over again. They had to play together, and so they're maximizing the outcome over 500 rounds. This is called a repeated game, and this is the solution to the prisoner's dilemma. If you want to get to the best world in a game theory situation, you need to be in a repeated game where you're not just interested in maximizing the payout from this one interaction, from taking advantage of someone. You want to maximize the lifetime of utility, value, however you want to describe it, from this interaction. And so what you need to do is create a repeated game. I think that's advice number 0, if you want to call it. Create repeated games. Create relationships with people, so that way you can benefit over a long run interaction rather than just trying to take advantage of someone in the moment.
If you don't want to believe the thousands of rounds of computer simulations, there is a very solid real-life example: YouTube. YouTube is a positive-sum game, which means that more than one person can win. And in fact, a lot of times, the more others win, the more you can win too. Steph and I, in our years of consulting, kept hammering home this one point, that YouTube is a place where all ships can rise. Leading with trust goes a long way.
All right, we've finally got to the moment where I have to air my grievances with MatPat, because he claims that you need to lead with trust. And that is why I have abstained from game theory for 12 years, because my trust with him was violated. How did that happen? Well, it's my last year of college, and I am applying to PhD programs because I want to become an economics professor. And while I'm trying to just immerse myself in the concept of economics, I think, wow, maybe I could find some cool stuff on YouTube. And so naturally, I start looking for some economics videos and came across one that really caught my eye. Here was somebody who was going to talk about Mario and some economic concepts in Mario, specifically the game theory of Mario. Within seconds of clicking on this video, I realized I had been duped, because this was not a discussion of applying game theory to Mario. It was a discussion about Mario lore or whatever else was going on. I never finished the video. You can see I've got the little progress bar on there. Never finished it because my trust was violated. I wanted to understand the game theory behind that. But maybe I should give MatPat some credit, because on this channel, I've been starting to do some of those things, like bringing in the economics behind Zelda and trying to understand how prices work in that game. It's the kind of stuff that I wanted to see. In fact, one of the videos I've dreamed of doing is finally getting at that question of the game theory in Mario. And that's what I thought I was going to do when MatPat retired. I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll finally make that game where I talk about game theory in Mario. And you know, as MatPat says, game theory is everywhere. So this should be a slam dunk. But then I started thinking about Mario. And I started thinking about the actions that you take as you're running across the screen and you're jumping over Koopa Troopas and you're going trying to grab everything. And I realized Mario is just like Tetris. The actions that I take influence nobody else. There's no strategic response. No one's taking into account what I'm doing. There is no game theory in Mario. That was a sad realization for me, because I couldn't do the video I wanted to do. Now, Mario Party, a completely different game. Tons of game theory in that game. But I never got to do the game theory of Mario, a video that was teased to me in 2011 and broke my trust with game theory. Now, you know what? With MatPat's retirement, I've decided to bury the hatchet. I actually have been binging a lot of game theory videos since I haven't watched them for the past 12 years. I've been going around his different channels, and you know, I got a little sentimental at his retirement video, because he really has built that trust with an audience, and it was really great to see how much that audience has loved him. And so, MatPat, I forgive you.